There's a version of this night that ends with
Good
a
evening.
family
We have a
eating
reservation
quiet
for the
dinner
Ellison
at home.
family.
Nobody's name remembered.
Good evening.
Nothing worth
Welcome
telling
to
anyone
Le Chateau
about.
Doré.
And then there's the version that actually happened. The one where a waiter looks straight through a paying customer, decides in 4 seconds who does and doesn't belong in his dining room, and finds out 6 days later that the man he turned away owns the building he's standing in. Atlanta carried the particular heaviness of a late spring evening. Warm air pressing against a glass front of Le Chateau door as the sun dropped low enough to throw orange light clean across the marble lobby floor. Inside, the restaurant hummed with its usual Saturday rhythm. Wine glasses catching candlelight, low conversation, the occasional clink of silverware against porcelain. It was a kind of room built to feel exclusive without anyone having to say so out loud. White tablecloths ironed to a stiff shine, a chandelier that had been imported from Lyon during the original 1987 build-out. Servers in black vests, moving with the practiced efficiency of people who knew exactly how much this place cost to walk into. At the center of the lobby stood a maitre d's podium, dark mahogany, worn smooth at the edges from 20 years of hands resting on it, while names were checked against a list. Whoever stood behind that podium held a small, specific kind of power. The power to decide, in the first 4 seconds a guest walked through the door, whether that guest was about to have a wonderful night or a humiliating one. Tonight, that podium belonged to Trent Callahan. Trent was 27, sharp-jawed, meticulous about his appearance in a way that read as competence to the people who liked him and self-regard to the people who didn't. He'd worked the floor at Le Chateau d'Or for 3 years, long enough to know the regulars by name, long enough to have developed a private, unspoken sense of who fit the room and who didn't, a sense he would have insisted, if pressed, had nothing to do with anything he shouldn't say out loud. He liked to think of himself as someone who could read a room in an instant. Tonight, that instinct was about to fail him in a way he wouldn't understand until it was far too late to undo. At 6:58 p.m., the front door opened, and Marcus Ellison walked in with his family. Marcus was 44, average height, unremarkable in the specific way powerful people sometimes choose to be unremarkable. A plain gray sweater, dark jeans, no watch worth a second glance. Beside him was his wife, Dana, warm-eyed and steady, her braids pulled back loosely, wearing the kind of simple elegance that didn't announce itself. Behind them trailed their 2 kids, Malik, 13, lanky and a little self-conscious in his good shirt, and Ava, 9, practically vibrating with the specific excitement of a kid who'd been told there'd be a dessert with her name on it tonight, because this dinner was for him. For Malik, making the honor roll, an achievement his parents had decided deserved white tablecloths and candlelight instead of a coupon at the pizza place down the street. They approached the podium together, unhurried, the easy posture of a family that had done this 100 times before at 100 other restaurants without incident. "Hi," Dana said, smiling. "We have a 7 o'clock. Ellison, party of 4. Trent's eyes moved over them quickly, sweater, jeans, braids, 2 kids fidgeting with their jacket hems, and something in his expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable, a kind of internal recalibration. He glanced down at the reservation book without really reading it, his finger hovering somewhere near the top of page instead of scanning down toward the E's. "Can I help you?" he said, in a tone that already presumed the answer wouldn't involve an actual reservation. "Ellison," Marcus repeated, calm, unbothered. 7 o'clock, party of 4. Trent's finger drifted across the page, not quite landing anywhere. "I'm not seeing that come up." "It should be right there," Dana said, still gentle, still assuming this was simple confusion rather than anything else. "We booked it Tuesday. I have the confirmation email, if that helps." "That's all right." Trent closed the book with a soft, deliberate thud, the kind of gesture meant to end a conversation rather than continue one. "We're actually at capacity tonight. I'd recommend maybe trying somewhere a little more," he paused, as if selecting the word carefully, as if it were a kindness rather than an insult, casual. "There's a good burger spot 2 blocks down, if you're looking for something for the kids." Malik glanced past him, toward a booth near the window where a middle-aged couple in jeans and faded T-shirts sat laughing over an open bottle of wine, no reservation ticket in sight, no urgency to be found anywhere at their table. Marcus followed his son's gaze, then looked back at Trent, and something in his face went very still, not angry, not wounded, just still, The particular stillness of a man doing quiet math and deciding, deliberately, not to solve the problem in front of him just yet. "We'll wait," Marcus said. "Take your time finding it." "Sir, I really don't think." "Take your time," Marcus said again, softer this time. And something about the calm in his voice made Trent's confidence flicker, just slightly, though he covered it fast. Trent didn't reopen the book. Instead, he straightened a stack of menus that didn't need straightening, buying himself a few seconds of motion to avoid standing still under Marcus's gaze. "Like I said, we're full tonight. I really can't see you." "You haven't looked," Dana said, quieter now, the specific quiet of a woman who'd run this exact calculation before, more than once, in more than one restaurant, deciding in real time how hard to push and how much of this her children needed to watch. "Please, just check again." "Ma'am, I don't need to check twice." An edge crept into Trent's voice now, the edge of someone who decided he was being questioned by people who didn't have the standing to question him. "If you'd like, I can take your number and call when something opens up. Could be an hour. Could be longer than that." Ava tugged at her mother's sleeve, sensing the temperature of the room shifting even if she couldn't name why. "Can we just go somewhere else?" Marcus crouched slightly, meeting his daughter's eyes, his voice gentle. "Give me 1 second, baby." Then he straightened and looked at Trent, not with heat, not with anything close to it, just that same unreadable stillness, the kind that made Trent shift his weight from one foot to the other without quite understanding why. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Trent." A pause. "Why? Is there a problem?" "Trent what?" "Trent Callahan." His jaw tightened. "Sir, is there an issue here?" "No issue," Marcus said. "Just remembering it." He turned back to his family, said something low to Dana that made her nod, and the four of them walked back out through the same door they'd come in, the chandelier's orange light following them across the marble one last time before the door swung shut behind them. Trent watched them go, already halfway convinced he'd handled it exactly right. A busy Saturday, a reservation he genuinely hadn't seen. Nothing more complicated than that. He had no way of knowing, standing there behind his podium with the evening rush pressing in around him, that the man who just walked out into the parking lot with his family owned every square foot of the floor Trent was standing on, and that by the following Tuesday, he'd know Trent's full name a great deal better than Trent had ever wanted him to. The diner sat 2 miles east, the kind of place with a buzzing neon sign, laminated menus gone soft at the corners, and coffee that arrived before anyone asked for it. It smelled like syrup and fryer oil and 40 years of Saturday nights, just like this one. And normally Marcus loved it, loved the noise of it, the unpretentiousness, the way nobody in a place like this ever made you feel like you needed to prove you belonged there. Tonight, though, he barely tasted his food. They'd slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl seats cracked and patched with silver tape, and ordered the way they always did when a night went sideways: pancakes for Ava, a burger for Malik, eggs for Dana, and coffee, black, for Marcus, who hadn't touched it in 10 minutes. Ava had recovered fastest, the way 9-year-olds often do, chattering about a video her friend had sent her, dragging a fry through a puddle of ketchup with the serious concentration of an artist. Malik was quieter, picking at his burger, glancing up every so often at his father like he was trying to read something off his face that Marcus wasn't saying out loud. "You okay?" Dana asked, low enough that it was just for him. Once Ava had gotten absorbed enough in her phone that she wasn't listening anymore. "I'm fine," Marcus said. "You're not fine. You've had that same look since we got in the car." He turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, a habit he had when he was working something out in his head. "I'm not upset the way you think I am." "How am I supposed to think you are?" "Loud," he said. "Like I want to go back in there and make a scene." "I don't." He looked up at her. "I'm past that part already. I'm somewhere else now." Dana knew that look. 15 years of marriage had taught her to read the difference between Marcus angry and Marcus working. And this was work, the particular quiet focus he wore when a problem had moved from his chest into his head, when it had stopped being a feeling and started being a plan. "You're going to do something about it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to do my job," Marcus said. "That restaurant is mine, Dana. Everything that happened at that podium tonight happened inside a building I own, run by a general manager I hired. Under a set of values I wrote down myself and had every single employee sign off on. That's not a coincidence I get to shrug off. That's a direct failure. and it's mine to fix. You could have told him who you were, Dana said. Right there. Would have saved us all a very bad diner burger. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Would have solved tonight. Wouldn't have solved anything else. He set the coffee cup down. If I flash my name and suddenly there's a table, all that tells me is that Trent Callahan treats owners different than he treats everybody else. It doesn't tell me anything about what happens to the next family that walks up to that podium on a random Tuesday with a name he doesn't recognize and a face he's decided he doesn't like the look of. I need to know what actually happens when nobody's watching. Now I know. Across the table, Malik had stopped pretending not to listen. Dad, he said quiet, why didn't he just look at the book? Like, it would have taken 2 seconds. Marcus looked at his son for a long moment before answering, choosing his words with the same care he chose everything else. Because he'd already decided something about us before he ever opened it. And once people decide something like that, looking stops feeling necessary to them. That's not really about the book, Malik. The book was never the problem. That's messed up, Malik said. It is, Marcus agreed. It's also not new, and it's not going to be the last time it happens to you in your life, unfortunately. What I want you to see, both of you, he glanced at Ava, who'd looked up from her phone without meaning to, is what happens after. Not the part where somebody's rude to us at a podium. The part where somebody with the power to do something about it actually does something about it. That's the part most people don't get to see happen. I want you to see it. Ava frowned, working through it. Are you going to get him fired? I'm going to find out exactly what happened, Marcus said. All of it. Whether this was one bad night for him, or whether it's something that's been happening for a while and nobody's caught it. And then I'm going to do whatever's fair based on what I find. That might mean he loses his job. It might not. I'm not deciding that tonight, sitting in a diner, still annoyed about a burger I didn't want to be eating. You always say that, Dana said. Not deciding tonight. Because it's usually true, Marcus said. Anger makes fast decisions. Fast decisions are usually wrong ones. I built the whole company avoiding that particular mistake. They sat for a while after that, the conversation drifting to easier things, Malik's honor roll, which had started this whole evening in the first place, Ava's video, the vague possibility of getting real dessert on the way home to make up for the one they never got at Le Chateau d'Or. But underneath the easier conversation, Marcus's mind kept circling back to the same short list of things he needed to do the moment Monday morning arrived. Pull the reservation log, pull the staffing schedule, find out exactly who'd been behind that podium, and find out whether Priya Anand, the general manager he'd installed 8 months earlier, still knew enough to the role that he'd been giving her room to find her footing, had any idea this kind of thing was happening on her floor. He thought about the way Trent had glanced past him at first, scanning the door like the reservation must belong to whoever walked in next. He thought about the couple in the window booth, no ticket, no urgency, laughing over their wine while his own family stood at a podium being told there was nowhere for them to sit. He thought about Ava's small voice, "Can we just go somewhere else?" And the way she'd said it like she already understood at 9 years old, that pushing back wasn't always worth what it cost. That, more than anything else, was the part he couldn't let go of. By the time the check came, Marcus had already drafted most of the email in his head, short, direct, no explanation yet, the kind of message that would land in Priya's inbox at whatever hour he finally sat down at his laptop that night and demand answers before she'd even had her morning coffee. He paid in cash, left a generous tip for a waitress who'd been nothing but warm to his kids the entire meal, a small, deliberate contrast he noticed and appreciated more than usual. And the four of them walked back out into the parking lot under a sky gone fully dark now, the neon sign buzzing red and blue against the asphalt. "Monday," Dana said, as they climbed into the car, more statement than question. "Monday," Marcus confirmed, starting the engine. "I want the full picture before I do anything. But it's happening." Priya Anand got to her office at 7:40 on Monday morning, a full 20 minutes before she usually did, mostly because she hadn't slept well and figured she might as well put the extra time to use. She had a coffee in one hand and a mental list of the week's staffing gaps in her head when she opened her laptop and saw the email sitting at the top of her inbox, time-stamped 6:14 a.m. Asterisk Priya, need the full staff schedule for Saturday night, front of house. Also need to see Saturday's reservation log, specifically anything under Ellison. Will explain when I see you. Keep this between us for now. M***. She read it twice. Marcus Ellison wasn't a man who sent cryptic emails. In the 8 months she'd worked under him since Ellison Hospitality Group acquired Le Chateau d'Or, his communication style had been almost aggressively direct. Clear asks, clear deadlines, no guessing games. This one felt different, and the difference put a small, cold knot in her stomach before she'd even finished her first sip of coffee. She pulled the staffing schedule first. Saturday night, front of house. 2 hosts rotating the podium. For servers on the floor, a bartender, a runner. She scanned the shift times against the 7 o'clock hour and found Trent Callahan's name at the top of the list. Podium duty, 5 to close. Then she pulled the reservation log. It took her less than a minute to find it. Ellison, party of 4, 7:00 p.m. And beside it, in handwriting she recognized instantly, because she'd seen it on a dozen order tickets and shift notes over the past 8 months. Someone had scrawled 3 words that made her stomach drop clean through the floor. No show, party left. She sat very still for a moment, staring at the note, running through every possible innocent explanation for it, and finding none of them held up. If the Ellisons had genuinely no-showed, there'd be no reason for Marcus himself to be emailing her about it before dawn, asking her to keep it quiet. People didn't investigate their own no-shows. People investigated things that had gone wrong. She pulled the seating chart next, cross-referencing it against the reservation log for the 7 o'clock hour, and the picture that emerged made the knot in her stomach tighten into something closer to dread. Table 12, open from 6:45 to past 7:30. Table 6, open the entire hour. 2 four-tops, sitting empty, while a confirmed reservation under the name Ellison had apparently just vanished, replaced with a handwritten note claiming the family never showed up at all. She thought about the name. Ellison. It wasn't a common enough name for her to dismiss the coincidence, and once she let herself actually consider it, once she stopped hoping it was nothing, she felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee on an empty stomach. She didn't wait for Marcus to arrive. She called him directly. "I found the log," she said, the second he picked up, "and the note next to the reservation. Marcus, was that you?" There was a pause on the line, brief but telling. "Yes." "Oh my God." She pressed her palm flat against her forehead, eyes closed. "I'm so sorry. I need to understand what actually happened Saturday night, because whatever this note says, it clearly isn't the truth. That's exactly why I need you to pull the schedule and figure out who was on that podium at 7, Marcus said. "I'm not going to tell you what happened yet, because I want you to find out independently, without me putting words in your mouth. I want to know what your own investigation turns up before I say a single thing about my own experience there. Can you do that today?" "Yes, of course." Priya was already pulling up the POS system logs on a second monitor, checking timestamps, cross-referencing which staff member had entered the no-show note into the reservation system and at what time. It took her 4 minutes to find the entry, logged at 7:52 p.m., under an employee ID that mapped directly to Trent Callahan. She sat back in her chair, the picture now fully formed and considerably worse than she'd let herself imagine 20 minutes earlier. "It was Trent," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "I know," Marcus said. "I want you to bring him into your office this afternoon. I want to see how he explains it in his own words, before anybody tells him what we already know. And Priya, I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear this the right way. I'm not calling to blame you for what one employee did on a Saturday night you weren't working. I'm calling because I need to understand whether this is a Trent problem, or whether it's a training problem, or whether it's something bigger than either of those that's been sitting under the surface of this restaurant for a while and nobody's caught it yet. That's what today is for." Priya exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Understood. I'll have him in my office at 4 when he clocks in. Are you coming?" "I'll be there," Marcus said. "Don't tell him why. Let him think it's something routine until I walk through the door." Priya spent the rest of the morning doing something she should have done months earlier, if she was honest with herself. pulling every guest complaint filed against the restaurant over the past year, cross-referencing them by server and host, looking for a pattern she'd never had a reason to go looking for before. Most of the complaints were the ordinary kind: slow service, a cold entree, a mixed-up order. But buried among them, spread out over 11 months, she found 4 separate complaints that made her stop scrolling and read them twice. A family of 5, back in September, describing being told the restaurant was fully booked, only to watch 2 other parties seated, without reservations, within the hour. A complaint in December from a couple who said a host had looked at us like we'd walked into the wrong building. One in February, vaguer, just a single line, felt unwelcome the second we walked in, would not recommend. And one from just 5 weeks ago, more detailed than the others, describing almost exactly the same podium exchange the Ellisons had experienced, a claimed lack of availability, a suggestion to try somewhere more casual, an open table visible from where they stood. Every single one of those shifts had Trent Callahan working the podium. Priya sat with that list for a long time, feeling something curdle in her chest that was equal parts anger and guilt. Anger at what had clearly been happening on her floor, and guilt at the fact that 4 separate guests had tried to tell her, in their own way, and she'd filed each complaint away as an isolated bad night instead of connecting the dots that had been sitting right there in front of her the entire time. By the time 4 o'clock rolled around, she had the complaint history printed and clipped together, sitting in a folder on the corner of her desk, waiting. She heard Trent's voice out in the hallway, easy and unbothered, chatting with one of the line cooks about the weekend's Braves game. He had no idea, walking down that hallway, that he was about to lose the job that easy voice belonged to. Trent Callahan clocked in at 4 o'clock with no idea that his week was about to fall apart, tied his apron on in the back hallway, and was halfway to the bread station to start his pre-shift setup when Priya's voice stopped him near the wine cellar. "Trent, my office, please. Everything okay?" He said it easily, the way you say it when you genuinely don't expect the answer to be no. "We'll talk in my office." He followed her down the narrow hallway, past the framed black and white photographs of the restaurant's original 1987 opening. Men in wide lapels cutting a ribbon, a Mayor Trent didn't recognize shaking hands with someone he'd never bothered to ask about, into an office that smelled like fresh coffee and warm printer toner. Priya sat down behind her desk. She didn't invite him to sit, which he noticed, though he told himself it didn't mean anything. "Saturday night," Priya said. 7 o'clock reservation, party of 4, under the name Ellison. "Walk me through what happened." Something in Trent's jaw tightened, just slightly, before he caught it and smoothed his expression back into something closer to casual. "We were slammed that night. I told them we were at capacity. Were you?" "It was busy." "That's not what I asked." Priya slid a printed copy of the reservation log across the desk toward him, the seating chart from that exact hour highlighted in yellow marker. Table 12, open from 6:45 to past 7:30. Table 6, open the entire hour. "You want to try that answer again?" Trent's eyes moved over the paper without really reading it. The way people look at evidence they already know they can't argue with. Look, it was a judgment call. The floor was a lot to manage that night, people kept. "A judgment call," Priya repeated flatly, "about a family with a confirmed reservation and a confirmation email, who you logged into the system as a no-show 40 minutes before they actually left. I have the timestamp, Trent. I have your employee ID on that entry." The room went very quiet. Trent's easy posture had drained out of him somewhere in the last 30 seconds, replaced by something tighter, more defensive. His hands finding the back of a chair he still hadn't been offered and gripping it. "They didn't look like they had a reservation," he said, and then seemed to hear himself say it a half-second too late, the way people sometimes do, the sentence already out in the air before the brain fully catches up to how it sounds out loud. Priya let the silence sit there for a moment, deliberately, before she spoke again. "I know exactly what you meant by that." She reached for the folder on the corner of her desk, the one holding 4 months of guest complaints she'd spent the morning tracking down. "I need you to sit down, Trent. There's something you need to know before we go any further with this." He sat slowly, his eyes flicking toward the folder like he already sensed it wasn't going to be good. The office door opened without a knock. Marcus Ellison walked in wearing a suit this time, not for effect. He'd come straight from a shareholders' call across town, but the effect landed anyway. The sharp lines of it a world away from the plain gray sweater Trent had glanced past 6 days earlier without a second thought. Trent felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him before anyone said a single word, some instinct catching up faster than his conscious mind, because the way Priya straightened in her chair told him exactly who this man was a full second before she opened her mouth. "Trent," Priya said, "this is Marcus Ellison. He owns Ellison Hospitality Group. He owns this restaurant." Trent's face moved through several stages in under 2 seconds. Confusion first, genuine and blank, then a flicker of recognition he couldn't quite place. And then, as the pieces started assembling themselves behind his eyes, something closer to horror. Asterisk the gray sweater. Party of 4. Ellison. "What's your name?" "Trent what?" Asterisk. "Oh my God," Trent said quietly, mostly to himself, one hand coming up to press against his mouth. "We've actually met before," Marcus said, his voice even, almost gentle, which somehow made it land harder than shouting would have. "Saturday night. 7 o'clock. My wife and my 2 kids were with me." "Mr. Ellison, I didn't know who you—" "I know you didn't," Marcus said. "That's actually the whole problem, Trent. You didn't know who I was, so you decided who I was anyway. And you were wrong, not just about me, about whoever else has been standing at that podium these last several months, wondering why a table that was clearly empty somehow wasn't available to them." Trent's eyes dropped to the folder still sitting on Priya's desk. "What is that?" "For complaints," Priya said. "September, December, February, and 5 weeks ago. All different families. All on shifts you were working the podium. I should have caught the pattern the first time it crossed my desk, and that's on me. But it's there, Trent, and it's yours." "I didn't," Trent started, then stopped, some part of him apparently recognizing that whatever sentence he'd been about to build wasn't going to hold up under its own weight. He sat back in a chair, the fight visibly draining out of him, replaced by something smaller and more honest. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," Marcus said. "I'm not here for an explanation. I already have everything I need." He glanced at Priya, a small nod passing between them, some understanding already settled before either of them had walked into the room. "Priya's going to walk you through what happens next. I'd ask you to take it seriously, because it is serious. This isn't about one bad night for me, Trent. It's about a job you had standing at a door, deciding who gets to feel welcome and who doesn't, and doing that badly, apparently more than once." He turned to go, then paused at the door, looking back one last time, not with anger, not with the satisfaction of a man who just won something, but with something closer to tiredness. "My daughter's 9, Marcus said. She asked me in the car why you wouldn't look for our table. I didn't have a good answer for her. I still don't really." He held Trent's gaze for a second longer. "That's the part one need you to actually sit with, not the job. That." Then he left, the door clicking shut behind him, and Priya reached for the termination paperwork already sitting, prepared, in the bottom drawer of her desk. The termination paperwork took 20 minutes to process, a formality by that point, since the outcome had been decided the moment Marcus walked through the door, but Priya insisted on doing it properly anyway. Reading each line aloud the way company policy required, making sure Trent understood exactly what he was signing and exactly what it meant. Effective immediately. Per Section 4.2 of the Ellison Hospitality Group Employee Handbook, discriminatory conduct toward guests, falsification of company records, termination without eligibility for rehire at any of the group's 11 locations, company-wide. Trent read the no rehire clause twice, his jaw working like he wanted to argue the point, and then didn't. There wasn't really an argument left to make. "My final check," he said instead, quieter now. "When do I?" "It'll process through the normal payroll cycle," Priya said. "You'll get it. Your employee discount card is deactivated as of right now, and I need your badge before you leave the building." He unclipped it from his belt loop and set it on the desk between them, the small plastic rectangle with his photo on it, a version of himself from 3 years earlier, younger, before any of this, smiling easily into a camera he hadn't known would end up meaning anything. "That's it?" he asked. "I just go." "That's it," Priya said, and something in her voice softened slightly, not enough to change anything, but enough that Trent noticed it. "I'm not going to pretend this is easy to sit through. It's not supposed to be. But there's nothing left to negotiate here, Trent. This isn't a warning. It's already happened. He stood, gathered the folded apron he tied on less than half an hour earlier and never gotten to wear onto the floor, and walked out through the back hallway one last time. Past the framed photographs of the 1987 opening. Past the wine cellar, past the bread station he'd been headed toward when Priya first called his name. A few of the kitchen staff glanced up as he passed, sensing something had happened without knowing what. The particular silence that spreads through a restaurant when word starts moving faster than facts do. By the time he reached the staff exit, most of the floor already suspected he wasn't coming back. Priya sat alone in her office for a long moment after the door closed behind him, the termination paperwork still open on her screen, the folder of guest complaints sitting closed now on the corner of her desk, like something she couldn't quite bring herself to file away yet. She'd known intellectually that this kind of thing happened. Every hospitality manager did, somewhere in the back of their mind, even if they never expected to find it happening on their own floor. But knowing it in the abstract and finding 4 dated, time-stamped instances of it sitting in her own complaint log, unconnected for months, because nobody had bothered to look for the thread running through them, was a different kind of knowing entirely. It sat heavier. It felt uncomfortably, like something she should have caught sooner. And she wasn't going to let herself off easy just because Marcus hadn't said so directly. Marcus knocked once and let himself back in a few minutes later, 2 coffees in hand, setting one down in front of her without asking if she wanted it. "You're doing the thing where you blame yourself," he said, sitting across from her. "I can see it on your face." "I should have caught it," Priya said. 4 complaints, Priya. 4. All the same podium, all the same pattern. And I filed every one of them under bad night, instead of connecting them. "You caught it this morning," Marcus said. "The second I gave you a reason to actually look. That matters more than you're giving it credit for. It shouldn't have taken you giving me a reason." "No," Marcus agreed, not unkindly. "It shouldn't have. I'm not going to tell you that's fine, because it's not, and pretending otherwise wouldn't do either of us any good. But I also didn't walk in here today looking for someone else to fire, Priya. I walked in here looking for someone who'd actually take this seriously once she saw it clearly. And that's exactly what happened the second I called you this morning. That's the difference between a problem and a pattern of problems. I need you to be the first, not the second." Priya wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, not drinking it yet, just letting the warmth sit there. "So what happens now? Beyond Trent, I mean." "Now," Marcus said, "we make sure this was the last time anybody has to file a complaint like the one sitting in that folder." He nodded toward it. "I want a real system, Priya. Not a handbook line nobody reads during onboarding week and forgets about by their second shift. Something that actually catches this the first time it happens, not the 5th. That's a bigger project than just this restaurant." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm not asking you to build alone, and I'm not asking you to build it by Thursday. But I'm asking you to start, and I'm going to be a lot more involved in helping you build it than I have been in the last 8 months. That's on me too, honestly. I gave you this location and mostly stepped back to let you find your footing. Maybe I stepped back further than I should have." Priya was quiet for a moment, turning the coffee cup slowly on the desk, the same habit her boss had, though neither of them would have noticed the resemblance. "4 complaints," she said again, mostly to herself. "I keep thinking about the family from September. Party of 5. I remember reading that complaint and thinking, that sounds like a rough night, table mix-up, nothing more than that. I never once thought to ask who was working the podium." "You're asking now," Marcus said. "That's what tonight needs to be about, not what you missed. What happens because you caught it." Outside the office, the dinner rush was building toward its usual Saturday-adjacent hum, guests filtering through the front door in 2s and 4s, greeted at a podium now staffed by someone else entirely, a backup host pulled in on short notice, checking names against the list with careful, deliberate attention, unaware of exactly why Priya had specifically asked her to double-check every party at the door tonight. No exceptions, no assumptions. Marcus watched the floor through the office window for a while, the chandelier throwing its familiar light across the marble, families being seated, glasses being filled, the ordinary rhythm of a restaurant that most guests walking through that door would never know had spent the entire day quietly falling apart and being put back together behind a closed office door. "It's still a good restaurant," Priya said, following his gaze. "I want you to know that. Today doesn't undo everything that's good about this place." "I know that," Marcus said. "That's exactly why I care enough to fix it properly instead of just being angry about it for a week and moving on." News has a way of moving through a restaurant staff faster than any official memo ever could, and by Sunday afternoon, most of the front-of-house team at Le Chateau d'Or had pieced together some version of what happened to Trent Callahan, even without anyone officially telling them. A busboy named Dario, who'd been restocking the wine cellar the night of the incident and had overheard just enough of the podium exchange to understand what it looked like from the outside, posted about it that evening on a local Atlanta community page, carefully, without using names, without mentioning the restaurant by name either, just a vague, frustrated post about watching a family get turned away from a nice place, while an obviously open table sat 15 feet from where they were, standing. Wild watching this happen in real time and knowing there's nothing I could really say without losing my job. Some people just don't think anybody's watching. The post wasn't meant to go anywhere. Dario had 340 followers, most of them friends from culinary school, and a handful of regulars who recognized him from a floor. But somebody screenshotted it and shared it into a larger Atlanta dining group, and somebody else in that group recognized the description well enough to name the restaurant in the comments. And within about 18 hours, what had been a private HR matter contained entirely within one office on one Tuesday afternoon had become something considerably harder to contain. The comments were the part that actually mattered, more than the original post itself. Once the restaurant's name was attached, other people started showing up with their own stories, some vague, some detailed, most of them describing a version of the same podium experience with just enough specific detail to feel credible. A suggestion to try somewhere more casual, a claimed lack of availability contradicted by an obviously open table, a tone that made a simple no feel like something else entirely. A woman named Renee wrote 3 paragraphs about a birthday dinner from the previous December that had ended in tears in the parking lot. A man named Deshaun mentioned September, a party of 5, a host who'd looked at his family, like we'd walked into the wrong building. Almost word for word what Priya had read in her complaint folder less than 48 hours earlier. By Monday morning, the post had over 600 shares. Marcus saw it before Priya did, forwarded to him by a friend who ran a hospitality PR firm and recognized the restaurant's name in the thread before it had even fully caught fire. He read through the comments twice, feeling something familiar settle into his chest. Not surprised exactly, since the complaint folder had already told him this was a pattern rather than an isolated incident, but a heavier kind of confirmation, the sense of a problem being bigger and older than even he had initially understood. He called an emergency meeting that morning with his head of communications, his legal counsel, and Priya on a conference line, and by early afternoon, a first draft of a public statement had landed in his inbox, careful, lawyerly, full of phrases like committed to reviewing the matter and taking appropriate steps, the kind of language designed to protect the company without actually saying much of anything. Marcus deleted most of it and rewrote it himself. "This isn't a legal problem first," he told his team on the call. "It's a trust problem. If we write something that sounds like it was written by a lawyer trying not to get sued, everybody reading it is going to know that's exactly what it is, and it's going to make things worse, not better. I want it to sound like a person actually wrote it, because a person did." He spent 2 hours on it that afternoon, alone in his office, rewriting the same 3 paragraphs over and over until they said exactly what he wanted them to say, an acknowledgement specific enough to be credible, without naming Trent directly or exposing him to anything beyond what had already happened to him professionally, paired with concrete commitments rather than vague ones. By 6 o'clock, the statement went out under the company's name, posted to the Ellison Hospitality Group website, and shared across their social accounts. Le Chateau d'Or and every restaurant under our name exists to welcome people, not to sort them. On May 17th, we failed a family who trusted us with their evening. That failure has already had consequences for the employee responsible, and it will continue to have consequences for how we operate going forward, because a termination alone doesn't fix a culture. Starting this month, every location in our group will implement mandatory bias awareness training for all front-of-house staff, a direct guest complaint escalation line reviewed weekly by ownership, not just management, and a hiring and review process built around one central question. Does this person understand that everyone walking through our door deserves the exact same welcome? We don't get to decide who looks like they belong here. Nobody working for us does that job for us ever again. Asterisk. The response, when it came, was mixed in the way these things almost always are. Some commenters were skeptical, pointing out, fairly, that a statement was easy to write and considerably harder to actually follow through on, that plenty of companies had issued similar language after similar incidents and quietly let the promises evaporate within a year. Others were more generous, noting that Marcus's statement had at least been specific rather than vague, that it named a real date and described a real failure instead of hiding behind corporate euphemism. Deshawn, the man who described his September experience in the original thread, commented directly under the company's post. Asterisk appreciate this being more than the usual nothing statement. We'll see if it's real in 6 months. That's the actual test. Asterisk. Marcus read that comment more times than any of the others, because it was the one he agreed with the most. A statement was a promise. Promises were cheap. What actually mattered was going to be measured in exactly the way Deshawn had described, not in this week's headlines, but in whether anything had genuinely changed the next time someone walked up to that podium, 6 months from now, with a name the host didn't recognize. He forwarded the comment to Priya with a single line attached. Asterisk, this is the bar. Let's clear it. Asterisk. 3 weeks passed before Trent Callahan came back to Le Chateau d'Or, and when he did, it wasn't during business hours, and it wasn't through the front door. He showed up just past 11 on a Tuesday night, standing near the staff entrance around back, half hidden by the dumpsters and the delivery ramp, waiting until the last of the closing servers had filtered out to their cars before he worked up the nerve to knock on the door still propped open for the overnight cleaning crew. Priya was the one who found him there, doing a final walkthrough before locking up, and her first instinct, a sharp, immediate flicker of irritation, softened somewhat when she got a better look at his face under the loading dock light. He looked thinner than she remembered, tired in a way that seemed to go deeper than a bad night's sleep. Trent. She didn't step aside from the doorway. You can't be back here. I know, I'm sorry, He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture of someone who'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times in the car and still couldn't find the version of it that felt right now that he was actually standing here. I was hoping I could talk to Mr. Ellison, just for a few minutes. I know that's not really how this is supposed to work, showing up like this, but I didn't know another way to ask. Priya studied him for a long moment, weighing whether this was worth even mentioning to Marcus, whether it was a genuine gesture or just Trent looking for one more chance to argue his way back into a job that wasn't coming back. But there was something in the way he was standing. No defensiveness left in it at all, none of the tightness she remembered from the office 3 weeks earlier, that made her pull out her phone instead of turning him away. Marcus texted back within a few minutes. Asterisk, let him in. I'll come down. Asterisk. They sat in the empty dining room 20 minutes later, the chairs still upturned on most of the tables around them, only a few low lights left on over the bar, the chandelier dimmed to a soft amber glow instead of its usual full brightness. It felt like a different room entirely at this hour, quieter, stripped of all the polish that made it feel like a stage during service, just 2 men and a handful of empty tables. I've been thinking about it every single day, Trent said, once he'd finally sat down across from Marcus, his hands clasped tightly on the table in front of him like he needed something to hold on to. What I said, the way I said it, I keep replaying the whole thing in my head over and over, and I honestly don't even fully recognize myself in it anymore. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse for anything. I needed you to know that I know it wasn't okay. Marcus said nothing at first, just watched him. The same unreadable stillness he'd carried at the podium 3 weeks earlier, though there was less coldness in it now, more genuine consideration. I'm not asking for my job back, Trent continued, when the silence stretched long enough to make him nervous. I understand that's done. I understand why it's done. I just needed to say this to your face, not through some letter or a phone call. I'm sorry, genuinely, not because it's the thing I'm supposed to say, because I mean it. Marcus finally spoke, his voice even measured, neither warm nor cold. I believe you're sorry, Trent. I actually do believe that. But I want you to understand something, because I don't think you fully understand it yet, even now, even after 3 weeks of thinking about it. He leaned forward slightly. This wasn't one bad moment for you. I know that's how it probably feels from where you're sitting. One bad night, one bad decision. Blown up into something much bigger than it should have been. But it wasn't one moment. It was a pattern. For separate families, over almost a year, all standing at that same podium, all getting some version of the same treatment. The only difference with my family is that we happened to have enough power behind us to make it matter. That's not luck you should feel good about missing, Trent. That's the actual problem. Trent's eyes were wet now, and he didn't try very hard to hide it. I didn't think of it that way. Honestly, I don't think I ever really let myself add it up like that. That's the part one needs you to sit with, Marcus said. Not just this one Saturday. All of it. My daughter's 9 years old. She asked me in the car that night why you wouldn't look for our table. I didn't have a good answer for her then, and I still don't, if I'm being completely honest with you right now. That's what actually stays with me. Not the reservation. Not even the job you lost over it. That question in the back seat of my car. Trent didn't say anything for a long moment, just nodded slowly, absorbing it the way you absorb something that's finally landed all the way, rather than just brushing past the surface of it. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's fine, Marcus continued. It's not fine. I don't think pretending otherwise would do either of us any good, and it definitely wouldn't do anything for the families who went through this before mine ever did. But I'm also not going to tell you there's no way forward from this at all. Not as a person, not in whatever you end up doing with the rest of your career, wherever that ends up being. Just not here. This isn't me trying to punish you forever, Trent. It's about what you actually do differently somewhere else, the next time nobody like me happens to be standing on the other side of that podium watching. It wasn't forgiveness, not in the full sense of the word. It wasn't rejection either. It landed somewhere in the narrow space between the two, an acknowledgement without absolution, a door left open just slightly rather than slammed shut for good, which was Marcus had learned over years of building and running a company full of imperfect people trying to do better, usually the most honest place for something like this to land. Trent nodded again, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and stood. Thank you for seeing me. I know you didn't have to. I know I didn't, Marcus said. I did it because I think what you do with the next version of this matters. I hope it does, anyway. Trent walked out the same way he'd come in, past the loading dock, into the dark parking lot, and Priya watched him go from just inside the doorway before turning back to Marcus, who was still sitting at the table, looking out at the empty dining room, like he was thinking through something much larger than the conversation that had just ended. You okay? She asked. Yeah, Marcus said, standing slowly. That felt like it needed to happen. For him. Maybe a little bit for me too. The weeks after the apology settled into something Priya hadn't expected. Not a return to normal, exactly, but a kind of forward motion that felt more deliberate than anything the restaurant had done in the 8 months since Marcus first acquired it. What had started as an emergency response to one bad night slowly became something closer to a real project, with a name, a budget, and a deadline Marcus refused to let slip. They called it the Open Door Standard. It began unglamorously, with a whiteboard in Priya's office covered in half-erased notes from a dozen different brainstorming sessions, training modules, escalation procedures, hiring checklists, most of it drafted and redrafted as Marcus kept pushing back on anything that felt like it was designed to check a box, rather than actually change behavior. This reads like a compliance seminar, he said, tapping a printed draft of the training curriculum against the desk during one of their weekly working sessions. 45 minutes, a quiz at the end. Forget it by the following Tuesday. I've sat through a dozen trainings like this over the years. Nobody remembers a single slide 6 months later. So what do you want instead? Priya asked, more tired than annoyed at this point, for drafts deep into the process. Something that sticks because it's real, not because it's mandatory. Marcus thought about it for a moment. What if new hires didn't just watch a video? What if they heard directly from guests, actual people, describing what it felt like to be turned away or what it felt like to be welcomed well. Not abstract, specific. That idea became the backbone of the whole program. Instead of a single seminar buried in an employee handbook nobody actually read past the first page, the open door standard built itself into every new hire's entire first week. Role-playing scenarios pulled directly from real incidents, a rotating panel of guests from different backgrounds sharing genuine experiences, both good and bad, and a single line every host and server had to memorize and repeat back out loud before they were cleared for their first shift on the floor. Asterisk, we do not decide who belongs here. The door decides that, and the door is always open. Asterisk. Priya pushed for a second piece almost as soon as the training curriculum was finalized, something that looked forward instead of just correcting backward. She proposed a scholarship fund, modest at first, aimed at covering hospitality management tuition for students from under-resourced Atlanta neighborhoods who wanted a real path into the industry from the other side of the podium, not just the kitchen. Marcus matched her initial seed funding within a day of hearing the pitch, no negotiation required. You built the accountability half, he told her. This is the half that actually builds something instead of just fixing something. I like that a lot more. The escalation line came next, a direct number, posted at every host stand across all 11 locations, reviewed personally by ownership every single week, rather than routed through the usual layers of middle management where complaints tended to quietly lose momentum before they ever reached anyone with the authority to act on them. Marcus insisted on reading every single complaint himself for the first 3 months, unwilling to delegate that particular responsibility to anyone else until he trusted the system was actually catching what it needed to catch. It was slow work, unglamorous in exactly the way real change usually is, no dramatic single moment to point to, just 100 small decisions stacked one on top of another, each one slightly improving the odds that the next family standing at that podium would get treated the way the Ellisons should have been treated from the very beginning. By late summer, the training program had rolled out across all 11 locations, and Priya had started tracking something she called, informally, the second look, a simple internal metric measuring how often a host double-checked a reservation list before turning a guest away, rather than relying on a glance and an assumption. It wasn't a perfect measure of anything really, but it gave her something concrete to point to in her monthly reports to Marcus, evidence that the culture was shifting in small, countable ways rather than just in the language of a public statement nobody could verify. Word of the program started spreading beyond the company itself, mostly through word of mouth in local hospitality circles. A regional restaurant association reached out that August, curious about the training model after hearing about it from a mutual contact, and Marcus found himself, somewhat to his own surprise, agreeing to speak about it at their annual conference the following spring. "You're turning this into a whole thing," Dana told him one evening, watching him draft speaker notes at the kitchen table, papers spread out around a laptop he'd mostly ignored in favor of handwriting his thoughts first. "I didn't plan on it becoming a whole thing," Marcus said. "I just didn't want it to be a one-time fix that quietly disappeared in a year. If it's actually working, other people should know how we built it. If it's not actually working, I'd rather find that out by talking about it publicly than by quietly hoping nobody ever checks." Dana smiled, leaning against the doorway. "That's very you. Turning your own restaurant into a public accountability test. Somebody has to hold it to a standard," Marcus said. "Might as well be the guy whose name is on the building." By the time September rolled around, for full months since the night at the podium, Le Chateau d'Or had a new host trained under the full open-door curriculum, a functioning escalation line that had already caught and corrected 2 smaller incidents before they became anything close to what had happened with Trent, and a scholarship fund with its first cohort of 3 students set to begin classes that fall. None of it undid what had happened in May. Marcus never pretended it did, and he made a point of saying so plainly whenever anyone, a reporter, a conference audience, his own son, asked him whether he considered the situation fixed. It wasn't fixed. It was better, measurably and specifically better, in ways he could point to and defend, and that distinction mattered more to him than any tidier word ever could. By November, the restaurant had settled into a rhythm that felt, to anyone walking through the door for the first time, entirely ordinary, the good kind of ordinary, the kind built on things running the way they were supposed to run, without anyone in the dining room ever needing to know what it had taken to get there. The chandelier still threw its familiar light across the marble floor each evening. The wine still came out at the right temperature. And, at the podium, a new host greeted arriving guests with the same careful attention Priya had spent months building into every part of the training curriculum. Her name was Zaria Coleman, 22, in her second week on the job, still new enough that she double-checked the reservation list on every single party, without exception, a habit that hadn't yet worn down into instinct the way it eventually would. She'd come to the restaurant from a hospitality program at Georgia State, recommended by an instructor who'd heard about the Open Door Scholarship Fund and thought Zaria might be a good fit for both the job and the values behind it, though Zaria herself hadn't known much about the program's backstory when she applied. Just that the pay was decent, the location was prestigious, and the training week had been more thorough than anything she'd experienced at either of her two previous restaurant jobs. On a slow Thursday evening, with the dinner rush still an hour off, Dana Ellison came in alone, wanting a quiet glass of wine at the bar before meeting Marcus there later for a rare dinner without the kids. She didn't announce who she was. She rarely did on the nights she came in without Marcus beside her, a small, private habit she'd developed over the years, mostly because she liked seeing a restaurant the way an ordinary guest actually experienced it, without anyone adjusting their behavior because the owner's wife happened to be sitting at the bar. Zaria was the one who greeted her, checking her in for the reservation Dana had made under her own maiden name out of the same quiet habit, walking her to a seat at the bar with the easy, practiced warmth of someone who genuinely enjoyed the first few minutes of a guest's evening. "Can I get you started with something to drink while you look over the wine list?" Zaria asked, setting down a menu. "Just a glass of the Sancerre if you have it open already," Dana said. "And take your time, no rush. I'm waiting on someone." Zaria nodded, disappeared briefly to relay the order to the bartender, and came back a few minutes later to check in once the glass had arrived, lingering just slightly longer than strictly necessary, not intrusive, just friendly, the kind of small extra warmth that made a restaurant feel like more than a transaction. "How long have you been working here?" Dana asked, mostly out of genuine curiosity, watching the younger woman wipe down the edge of the bar with the same careful attention she seemed to bring to everything. "About 2 weeks, Zaria said. "Still getting my legs under me, honestly. Everybody keeps telling me how different this place used to be before I got here. I don't really know the whole story. I think something happened before I started, some kind of incident, but my trainer said that's the reason we do the whole memorization thing during orientation." "What memorization thing?" Dana asked, though she already knew the answer, having sat in on an early draft of the training curriculum herself, offering feedback from her own professional background as a family therapist, someone who understood better than most how a single sentence repeated enough times could actually reshape behavior rather than just decorate a handbook nobody read. "There's this line we all have to say back before we're cleared for our first shift," Zaria said. "We do not decide who belongs here, the door decides that, and the door is always open." Sounds a little formal saying it out loud like that, but honestly, it stuck with me more than almost anything else in the whole week of training. I think about it every time somebody walks up to that podium now. Even on a busy night when I'm stressed and just want to get everybody seated fast, it kind of sits there in the back of my head. "Does it actually feel different?" Dana asked. "Working here, I mean, compared to wherever you worked before." Zaria considered the question seriously, the way people do when they sense it's not just idle small talk, though she had no idea it was the owner's wife sitting across from her asking it. "It feels like nobody's guessing about you before you've even opened your mouth," she said finally. "That's actually pretty rare when I think about it. I worked at 2 other places before this one, a chain steakhouse and this smaller Italian spot near Midtown, and there was always this unspoken thing at both of them, which tables you steered certain guests toward, which parties got seated fast, and which ones got told to wait even when there was clearly room. Nobody ever said it out loud, exactly, but you felt it if you were paying attention. And here it's different," Zaria said. "This is actually the first place I've worked where I watched a host chase a family down in the parking lot because their reservation got mixed up in the system, just to make sure they knew they were still welcome inside, that it was a system error and not anything about them. That wouldn't have happened at either of my old jobs." Somebody would have just let them walk off annoyed and moved on to the next table. She shrugged, wiping the bar one more time out of habit rather than necessity. I don't know. It just feels like the door actually means what it says here, instead of being a line somebody made us memorize for the sake of memorizing it. Dana smiled, something warm and quiet settling in her chest that she didn't bother explaining. That's a good thing to notice. Most people walk through a place like this without ever thinking about what's underneath it. I think about it a lot, actually, Zarya said. Probably because of a scholarship. I'm doing night classes through the same program that got me hired here. Hospitality management, paid for through some fund the company runs. I don't know all the details behind it, but I know it exists because somebody decided it should, and that's not nothing, you know? Most restaurants just pay you, and that's the whole relationship. This one feels like it's trying to be something more than that, even if I can't always name exactly how. Dana finished her wine slowly after that, letting the conversation drift toward easier things. Zarya's night classes, her plans to eventually manage her own restaurant someday, a story about a chaotic table of 12 from her very first shift that still made her laugh describing it. She never told Zarya who she was. She left a generous tip, thanked her warmly, and slipped out just before Marcus arrived, catching him in the parking lot instead of at the bar. You should hire more people like that girl at the front, Dana said, sliding into the passenger seat as Marcus circled around to meet her. Which girl? Zarya, new host, doesn't know who I am, told me completely unprompted that this feels like the first restaurant she's worked at where the door actually means what it says. Dana buckled her seatbelt, a small, satisfied smile settling on her face. That's it, Marcus. That's the whole thing you've been building for 6 months, coming out of a total stranger's mouth without her having any idea she was talking to the person who built it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, pulling out of the parking lot, something settling in his chest that felt, for the first time since that Saturday night in May, something close to relief rather than resolve. Good, he said finally. That's the actual test, not the statement, not the training binder, just that. The Regional Restaurant Association's annual conference took place the following spring in a hotel ballroom on the outskirts of Charlotte, the kind of room with stacked chairs against the back wall and a podium of its own, a different kind of podium than the one at Le Chateau d'Or, though Marcus found himself thinking about that word more than usual as he waited backstage for his name to be called. He hadn't expected, a year earlier, to end up here. The invitation had come almost by accident, a mutual contact mentioning the open door standard to someone on the association's programming committee, and Marcus had said yes mostly because Dana pushed him toward it, arguing that if the program was actually working the way the numbers suggested, other people in the industry deserved to hear how it had been built, mistakes and all. Most talks like this skip the mistakes, she told him, going over his notes at the kitchen table a week earlier. Everybody wants to present the finished version, the clean success story. You should tell them about the 4 complaints Priya almost missed. That's the part that'll actually help somebody. So he did. He stood at the podium in front of maybe 200 restaurant owners and general managers from across the Southeast and told them the whole thing, start to finish. The Saturday night dinner meant to celebrate his son's honor roll. The podium, the empty tables. The diner 2 miles away where he'd sat with his family deciding what to do next. He told them about Priya finding the falsified reservation note, about the 4 complaints sitting unconnected in a folder for months before anyone thought to look for the pattern running through them. He told them, plainly, that he still didn't have a good answer for his daughter's question in the back seat of the car that night, and that he didn't think there was one, not really. That some things just stayed with you instead of resolving into something tidy. I'm not up here because we solved this, he told the room. I'm up here because we built something that's measurably better than what we had before, and I think that's a more honest thing to offer you than a story about solving it completely. If anyone tells you they've solved this permanently, be skeptical. What you can actually build is a system that catches it faster, corrects it more visibly, and makes the next family standing at your podium a little more likely to get the welcome they should have gotten in the first place. That's the whole ambition. It doesn't need to be bigger than that to be worth doing. The room was quiet for a moment after he finished, the particular quiet of people recalculating something, rather than simply applauding out of politeness. And then the questions started, more of them than the moderator had planned time for, restaurant owners from 4 different states asking about the training curriculum, the escalation line, how Priya had structured the guest panel that formed the backbone of new hire orientation. By the end of that year, 4 other independent restaurant groups across the Southeast had reached out, adapting versions of the open door standard for their own staff, not identical copies, since each group modified it to fit their own culture and scale, but built from the same core pieces Priya had assembled that first summer. Real guest testimony instead of abstract training videos, a memorized line meant to actually mean something rather than decorate a handbook, and an escalation system, with real ownership accountability behind it instead of layers of middle management where complaints tended to quietly lose momentum. Trent Callahan's name never appeared in any of it. Marcus made a point of that in every interview, every conference talk, every version of the story he told publicly. The failure belonged to a system, even when a single person's choices had triggered it. And he wasn't interested in turning one 27-year-old's worst professional moment into a permanent public spectacle. What mattered, he said, whenever anyone pushed for more detail than he was willing to give, wasn't punishing one person forever. It was making sure the next person standing at that podium, whoever they turned out to be, had been trained and held accountable in a way Trent never had been. Malik was 14 now, taller than he'd been that Saturday night at the podium, sitting across from his father in the back office of Le Chateau d'Or on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, doing homework at the small conference table, while Marcus worked through a stack of weekly escalation line reports. "Do you ever think about it anymore?" Malik asked, not looking up from his textbook. That night, the waiter. Marcus set the report down, considering the question the way he considered most things his son asked him, unwilling to give a quick answer just to move the conversation along. Through the office window, he could see the dining room floor below, a Tuesday lunch service winding down, a host greeting a family of 4 at the podium, checking their name carefully against the reservation list before walking them to their table with an easy, unhurried warmth. "Every time I walk through that door," Marcus said. "That's kind of the point, honestly. I don't think I'd want it to stop being something I think about. The day it stops mattering to me is probably the day it starts slipping again." Malik looked up from his homework, considering that for a moment. "That's kind of a lot to carry around, though. Just always thinking about it." "It is," Marcus agreed. "But most things worth building are a lot to carry around. That's usually how you know they're actually worth something." He nodded toward the window, toward the host at the podium below, checking the reservation list one more time before waving the family through. "You see her down there? She doesn't know the whole story behind why she does that. She just does it because it's what she was trained to do, because somewhere along the way it stopped being a rule and started being who she actually is at that podium. That's the actual win, Malik. Not the statement I put out. Not the conference talk. Just that, somebody doing the right thing without having to think hard about why." Malik went back to his homework after that, and Marcus went back to his reports, and outside the window, the ordinary rhythm of the restaurant continued exactly the way it was supposed to, guests arriving, being seen, being seated, the door meaning, as closely as any door built by imperfect people ever could, exactly what it said it meant. There's a version of the story that ends the moment Trent Callahan hands over his badge, the satisfying part, the part that feels like justice delivered cleanly and completely. It's tempting to stop there, because it's the part that resolves fastest. The wrong is named, the consequence lands, and everyone involved can exhale. But that version misses almost everything that actually mattered, which is everything that happened afterward slowly, without any single dramatic moment to point to. Firing one waiter doesn't fix a restaurant, any more than punishing one person ever fixes a culture on its own. What actually changes things is quieter and less cinematic than that. A general manager rebuilding her hiring process from the ground up after finally connecting a pattern she'd missed for months. A training curriculum getting rewritten and repeated until a single memorized line stops being a rule employees recite for the sake of recitation and starts being something closer to instinct. A scholarship fund quietly opening a door for a handful of students who'd otherwise never have gotten near the industry from anywhere but the kitchen. A new host, 2 weeks into her first real job, noticing, without anyone telling her to notice, without even knowing the full story behind why the training felt different. That something about the way this particular restaurant treats people is unlike anywhere she's worked before. That noticing, offered up freely to a stranger at the bar who happened to be the owner's wife, is the actual proof. Not the termination letter. Not the public statement. The simple, unprompted absence of a repeat. Marcus Ellison never set out to teach anyone a lesson on that Saturday night in May. He set out to have dinner with his family, to celebrate his son making the honor roll, the kind of small, ordinary milestone that deserved white tablecloths and candlelight instead of nothing at all. The lesson only existed because someone standing at a podium decided, in the space of about 4 seconds, that this particular family didn't quite look like they belonged there, and was confident enough in that snap judgment to say so out loud, twice, standing in front of 2 visibly open tables and a reservation with their name already printed on the list. That, in the end, is really the heart of the whole story. Prejudice, most of the time, isn't loud or theatrical. It rarely announces itself as prejudice at all. It's a maitre d's podium. It's a finger that doesn't quite scroll far enough down a page it was never really planning to read. It's a suggestion to try somewhere more casual, delivered in a tone carefully calibrated to sound like a kindness instead of what it actually is. It moves on quickly, confident nobody will push back hard enough to matter. And most of the time, it's right about that. Most families who get turned away from a restaurant, or followed a little too closely through a store, or spoken to a little too slowly and a little too loudly, don't get the chance to walk back into that same building 3 days later holding any real power at all. They just go home. They eat somewhere else. They carry it quietly, and nothing about the building itself ever changes. Not the podium, not the policy, not the next family standing in that exact same spot the following Saturday, about to have the exact same conversation. What Marcus had, that almost nobody in that situation actually has, was the standing to make sure it didn't just move on this time. And more importantly than the standing itself was what he chose to do with it. Not immediate, public retaliation, not a scene made in the moment out of anger, but a deliberate, unhurried process. Pull the records first, understand the full shape of the problem before reacting to it, separate the person from the pattern, and then build something durable enough to outlast the single incident that exposed it. That distinction is really the whole shape of the story. Anger identifies a problem. It rarely builds anything that lasts. What lasts is slower, quieter, and a great deal less satisfying to watch unfold in the moment. A folder of overlooked complaints finally getting cross-referenced. A training program rewritten until it actually sticks. A stranger at a bar saying something true without any idea who was listening. Trent Callahan's ending, notably, isn't a villain's ending, even though nothing about what he did gets excused or softened along the way. He loses the job. He carries the weight of it, visibly, in a parking lot conversation 3 weeks later that resolves into something honest, rather than something clean. He isn't given a redemption arc within these pages, because that was never really the point of the story. The point was never what happens to him, but what happens to everyone who comes after him, standing at that same podium, making that same 4-second decision about who gets to feel welcome. That's the real reason the open door standard mattered more, in the end, than the termination letter ever could on its own. It was Marcus using the one advantage he actually had, not his money, not his title, but the standing to rebuild something at the institutional level, on behalf of every family who would never get the chance to do the same for themselves. The podium, in the end, was never really the point. What the door decided to mean for the next person standing in front of it, long after this particular story had faded from anyone's memory. That was the point all along, and it still is.